Hey guys, it's your bro Les, going to give you a quick introduction. Today I'm here to present to you my first very own world-class YouTube video. Okay, well, I guess I'm not your bro yet because this is my first video. And this isn't even my first video, just my first video on this channel. Anyways, I'm going to be opening this channel with something very simple. A video game review. In the coming videos, I'm going to be talking about other games or making videos on other topics. But for now, I'm going to be sticking to video games. What game are we going to be talking about today, you ask? Yep, that's right. The classic. Final Fantasy VI. I know it says Final Fantasy III on that screen, but I can explain, I swear. See, the games were released in America in a different order than they were in Japan for the earlier titles. Final Fantasy was just Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy IV was Final Fantasy II, and Final Fantasy VI was Final Fantasy III. Some weird stuff, I know. These titles were later fixed for the GBA releases of the games. For those of you who don't know, Final Fantasy is a JRPG, or Japanese role-playing game, that was released by Square, which is nowadays merged into Enix and known as Square Enix. It's set in a world roughly technologically equivalent to the real-world 19th century, with some fantasy added for good measure. Now, you may be here already knowing the game, or might have never even seen it, so this video, and all the ones to come, will be spoiler-free. After all, the intent of this review is to get you to go and play the game yourself, not spoil you on the whole thing. But, let me give you a quick rundown. Don't worry, I won't give out any major details. Basically, the game focuses on a conflict between two forces who want to control magic through these magical beings called espers. One side wants to use it to control the world, and the other seeks a magical power to stop that from happening. Our main character, who shall remain nameless, is an amnesiac with no memories at the start of the game. Not a cliche at all, eh? I'm not a big player of old games, but I think this may have already been a cliche back in those days. Regardless, now that you know that much, let's move on to actually review the game. Now, to get right into the meat of the game. The gameplay. This is a classic Final Fantasy game. None of that new garbage. So the battle system is quite simple and effective. Characters have an ATB gauge, which stands for Active Time Battle, that fills over time, and when it's full, they may perform an action. I know this doesn't seem like a big deal, but back then, Final Fantasy IV was the first game to do this, and this is an innovation from a simple speed stat or set turn order. It allows faster characters to attack twice or even more before a slower one could even act. The characters are highly customizable, any character being able to learn any spell later in the game. Of course, based on stats, it might not be the best idea, but the concept is solid. When outside of combat, the game is, like most RPGs, an adventure. However, for the vast majority of the game, it's pretty linear on where you're supposed to go, and doesn't give you a lot of freedom to do whatever you want. You can, but there's not much benefit to doing so, unless you want to find hidden enemies, or do the post-game content in the GBA version. A lot of the dungeons are pretty linear, some have hidden enemies in them, but there's not a lot of variation to what is being done to them, which isn't a bad thing. You're just supposed to fight your way through them. It won't get boring unless you're an RPG veteran, since it can be a bit difficult. But, if you're an RPG veteran, I guess you've already played this game. The battles being difficult to get through adds a lot to the game for me, as an easy game can be really boring, as any experienced gamer knows. It's not the hardest Final Fantasy. I personally think that may be Final Fantasy IV, not counting Final Fantasy Legend, of course, that hellish game, but it's a good challenge. There's a lot of party members, so there's a lot of approaches you can take to beat a certain boss, or even challenge yourself on purpose. For gameplay, I give this game a solid 8 out of 10. Now, let's talk about the game feel that helps tie it all together. The game's music, sound, and graphics tie together to give it a very artistic feel. I know what the pixels and limited instruments of the SNES hardly sounds artistic, and maybe trying to go a bit over the top for the limited graphics that were available, but just look at the video in the background. It may not be the original game there, but the art is pretty close, and it's pretty good. And, well, the game's music, don't even get me started. In my opinion, it's beautiful, it's wonderful, it's like one of the best game OSTs I've ever heard. I mean, just listen to this beauty. Overall, the game has a very nice feel to it. It's a world I'm quite happy to immerse myself in, which, well, that's what you want of an RPG, isn't it? Well, I'm happy to immerse myself in it until, things happen, things that we can't talk about here. It may take a bit of getting used to, especially if you're used to the high budget titles of today, but if you're looking at it as a game of its time, it's very solid. Now, I may be a bit biased, since this is almost my favorite RPG of all time, but for game feel, I give this game an 8 out of 10. Okay, so the most cliche annoyance of classic RPGs, the random encounters. They can get annoying when we're just trying to explore, as any classic RPG player knows. The game is trying to force us to level up and get stronger by fighting the enemies, which is necessary, but a lot of the time if we're getting tired of it, we will just run away from the enemies anyway. It's just an RPG thing, you have to get used to it. This can however be mitigated by an accessory that has encounters later in the game, and one that completely eliminates them. Another annoyance is, like I mentioned earlier, the lack of early freedom in the game. But that's not really a bad thing. Giving you a lot of freedom to go places early in the game could be boring and troublesome due to the lack of abilities in your party, the unfamiliarity with the huge world, and with tough enemies. But if you can excuse these things, as no game is perfect, then you should definitely play the game. This game is approved. Hey guys, thanks for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, leave a like and your address in the comments, and I will personally go to your house and make you 3 gallons of fried rice. That's right, so if you like fried rice, leave a like and I hope you guys have a nice day. Peace out.